Assalamu alaikum. I hope all my students are okay. Okay, that's good. Well, my dear students, we talked about the description of consonant sounds when we were talking about the details, or rather other 5 different pieces of information. I hope you remember. That's very good. As I requested you to please connect each and every session with the next one or the previous one. So far we have to connect this session with the previous one. Out of 5 different pieces of information, I hope you remember. Yes, starting from the airstream mechanism. Yes, exactly. And we try to understand the state of glottis. Yes, very good. And we also talked about the position of soft palate, the velum. And the 4th piece of information we talked about in the previous session was the articulators. Yes, exactly. You're absolutely right. And I also said that deliberately I am leaving one piece of information, that is stricture. Yes, I deliberately left that one because we have to talk in detail about stricture today. So welcome to session number 12. And we are in the 6th week of our course, and of course when I say course, that means our semester. So you are ready and you are with me. That's good. I welcome you all to session number 12, week number 6, and I hope that you are working hard to master some of the concepts which are governing phonetics and phonology. Well, before I talk about today's topics, which are of course in front of you can see on your screen, they are description of consonants and of course a stricture, which I talked about, its nature and types. I want you to remember always that I'm trying to make this kind of virtual learning different, in the sense that what happens most of the time, I've seen that when somebody is talking, of course the listener is there. He or she can listen to the speaker as many times he or she desires, because you've got the facility to stop. This doesn't happen definitely when you're having a class on virtual class, because when a number of students are sitting and they are attending the class, again this is difficult. But when you're free, not necessarily that you are only attending the class, but when you are free and you've got opportunity in time and space, definitely you can go to your roof, you can have internet access, and you can just time and again you can listen to me or for instance any other instructor. But what I'm trying to do is that to provide you a chance that of course online learning can be done through this way. For example, most of the time I ask you to stop over here and think about this and start doing this. To me, I think so when we are virtually having learning and of course teaching at the same time, remember we have to feel that alright, the instructor is in front of us, and of course when I think about myself, I always feel that my students are listening to me and they are very much in front of me. And to be very honest and fair, sometimes I'm smiling, sometimes I am taking pauses, and I try to adopt the natural way to talk to you. I don't want to get myself engaged in only slide reading. No, that is not good. Slide reading is not good. Same is the case with you when you are reading, when you are trying to have this session separately. I mean, when you are free, you can have access to this session, you have downloaded it. So please stop as many times you can and start doing the things which I request you to do, because it's very important. Not only this course, I'm not referring to this course, but I'm talking about any course. For instance, maybe that is a course based on some poetry, some novels, some drama, or any other branch of linguistics. That makes no difference at all. But what you need to do is that, because you have got the maximum time at home or wherever you are living, so you can access these demonstrations time and again, and please try to write down, please try to record your voice. For example, when I ask you to record your voice, do it. and then listen to yourself. So this is my request again during this a session, that you need to do again certain activities. So let's talk about our today's topics. They are description of consonants. We should try to describe consonants, but more time we shall be spending on stricture, its nature and types. And this is the fifth type of information, or the piece of information we have to concentrate. Okay, well, just as a reminder, again the slide is very much in front of you, you can understand it. But this is what we talked about in session number 11, because we try to describe the consonants, and I told you that 5 kinds of information, or pieces of information are very important to understand the description of consonants. And I still remember I told you that number 1 is the nature of the airstream mechanism. We have to understand the mechanism nature, that's most important. The second, in the beginning, I said that, all right, what is the state of the glottis? We have to determine. The third one is the position of the soft palate. Of course, that is also known as velum. The fourth one, the articulators involved. I think we had a long discussion on this, that what kind of articulators we have in our mouth. Of course, some are active and some are passive. To remind you, I would like to say that we have got 2 active articulators. One is the tongue, the other one is the lower lip. But remember, so far as the tongue is concerned, that is the most active articulator. And then I deliberately left one part, that is the nature of the stricture. That was the fifth, or that is the fifth piece of information we must consider and we must understand when we are going to describe the consonants. So our today's main topic is the nature of the stricture. All right. Now, anybody can ask you, if you are the student over phonetics and phonology, what is stricture? What is stricture? This is the significant point to understand, that why did I leave talking about stricture in detail when we were talking about the 5 pieces of information before the description of consonants. If there is a question from any quarter that what is stricture, the simple answer is, my dear students, a constriction of airflow in the vocal tract in the production of speech. Again, then there is another question, there is a possible next question, then what is constriction? If one is unable to understand what is stricture, because the answer is a constriction of airflow in the vocal tract in the production of speech, definitely somebody, maybe he or she is confused a lot, that what is constriction means then. And the answer is also given over here. These are very simple answers you can find in any book, or maybe any material you are having, no problem at all. I in fact want you to understand the very simple words, that what is the meaning of stricture and what does we mean constriction when we use it. When I'm referring to stricture, always remember that is the constriction of airflow. That is the constriction of airflow. Whenever we produce any sort of sound, remember, of course, speech sound, there is a constriction of airflow where? In the vocal tract. That's very important to understand. This is constriction, but that is where? That is the vocal tract. Vocal tract. As I told you, when we were trying to understand the mechanism of airstream, I still remember that I told you that the lungs push the airstream upward, right? And over here we find some sort of constriction. Why? Because the first stop is the vocal tract, of course, and then the vocal folds are there. The tract is the entire tube or the entire windpipe, and then definitely we have got certain stages and certain stops are there, certain stations are there, because these are the stages the airstream has to pass to produce any sort of speech sound. Now, if the question is stricture, the answer is, if somebody puts a question, what is stricture? The answer is, it's constriction of airflow in the vocal tract in the production of speech. But then the new question is, what is constriction? Okay, so the answer to that question is a place where something has become tighter or narrower, and very precisely obstruction. So that means stricture is primarily obstruction. Obstruction. There is some sort of blockage. Obstruction. Sometimes it is complete, sometimes it is partial, right? It's very important to understand. Sometimes naturally when we are producing speech sound, I hope you remember the articulatory phonetics. Yes, exactly. Remember when we are producing speech sounds, especially the consonant sounds of English, what happens that sometimes there is a complete closure, of course the airflow, sometimes there is a partial. So now we understand stricture is primarily obstruction. Obstruction of airflow where? In the vocal tract. And when it happens during the production of speech sounds. Is that clear? That's good. Now after having understood what is stricture, which we understand is obstruction, now we have to understand the degree of stricture. That's very important to understand. Now step by step you can understand that first of all we try to describe the consonant sounds on the 5 pieces of information. Number 1 was the airstream mechanism, 2 was the state of the glottis, 3 position of the soft palate, 4 the articulators involved, and 5th the nature of stricture, right? And then we try to understand what is stricture. And we came to know stricture means some sort of constriction where in the vocal tract of what? Of the airflow, when it happens when we are producing the speech sound. Alright? And then we try to understand what is the constriction. So we came to know obstruction means constriction. Now we have to understand the degree of stricture. Now I would like to read the statement for you people first of all. Degree of stricture means how narrow the gap is between the active articulator and the passive articulator at the narrowest point in the vocal tract. Now it's very important. Everything is happening in the vocal tract. And degree of stricture. Degree of stricture. That means there is some sort of gap in between the articulators. And what articulators? Active articulator and passive articulator. It's very important to understand because the statement says how narrow the gap is between the active articulator and the passive articulator. At the narrowest point, the place of articulation. The place of articulation in the entire of the vocal tract, we have to determine when we try to understand stricture and the degree of stricture. The most important thing is to understand the gap in between the active articulator and the passive articulator, right? Gap, space, and where it happens, of course, in the vocal tract. Absolutely right. Now remember, this slide also tells us that we can distinguish 3 degrees of constriction. 3 degrees of constriction, as I was talking about. 3 degrees of obstruction. The first degree is complete closure, that the articulators are completely closed. The second is the close approximation, and the third is open approximation. So that means when we talk about stricture, we understand it is some kind of constriction. What is constriction? We try to understand. Alright, we came to know that means obstruction. And then we try to understand, alright, it is something about the gap between the active and the passive articulators, where in the vocal tract, and we have to determine the narrowest point. When we say this, we came to know, alright, there are degrees and there are 3 types of degrees, right? One is a complete closure, the second is the close approximation, and the third one is the open approximation. Okay? Now let's understand 3 degrees of stricture. Yes, 3 degrees. So far as the complete closure is concerned, that is self-explanatory. That means, alright, there is a complete blockage. Okay? If there is a question, what is complete closure? That means there is a complete blockage. Air flow cannot pass. Complete blockage, we can feel it. But let's talk about close approximation. What is close approximation? Remember, close approximation means so close together that it causes audible friction. Friction. Now, what is friction? The resistance that one surface or object encounters when moving over another. Since we are talking about the gap in between what? In between the active and the passive articulator. Now, the second degree is close approximation. This is what you must understand. Close approximation means so close together that it causes audible friction. What is friction then? The resistance that one surface or object encounters when moving over another. There is some sort of resistance, all right, that one surface or object encounters when moving over another. That's very important. That is called close approximation, as the term itself tells us now. There is some sort of closeness that causes audible friction, that enables us to understand there is some sort of resistance in the production of speech sounds. And then open approximation. What is open approximation? Open approximation means that the oral tract is somewhat more open than in close approximation, so that there is no friction. So that means there is no friction at all. That is called close approximation. Where? In the oral tract. Are you getting my point? All right, that's great. I am saying the difference between close approximation and open approximation. What is the difference then? In close approximation, definitely we are talking about articulators. What does that mean? There is a resistance in close approximation. But when we talk about open approximation, remember the oral tract is somewhat more open than close approximation, so that there is no friction. So if there is no friction at all, there is no resistance at all, we call it open approximation. But when there is some sort of friction, an audible friction should be there. Resistance should be audible. That is called close approximation. But when we talk about complete closure, we can understand, all right, complete blockage is there. All right. Now, it's very important to understand that what happens then when we understand the 3 degrees of stricture. What happens then? Complete closure, then close approximation, then open approximation. What happens consequently? The 3 degrees of stricture are associated with different kinds of consonants and vowels. This is the outcome. That if there is a complete closure, what kind of sounds we get? If there is close approximation, what kind of sounds we have? And if there is open approximation, what kind of sounds we get? All right? What is the consequence? The consequence is that after having understood the degrees of stricture, we have got different kinds of consonants and vowels. Let's talk about, for example, number 1. When there is a complete closure, what kind of sounds are there? Stops, plosives and implosives, nasals, trills, taps and flaps. But you have to focus yourself on stops, plosives and nasals. All right? So, are you getting my point? When we talk about complete closure, what kind of sounds we get? Stops, nasals, trills, taps and flaps. And you have had a wonderful discussion, rather both of us had wonderful discussion on this time and again. And when we have close approximation, what kind of sounds are there? Yes, exactly, we have got fricatives. Fricatives. Do you remember the classification of consonants? Yes, exactly, we have got fricatives. And in the case of open approximation, we have got approximants, of course liquids and semi-vowels, and vowels. Open approximation, what we have, yes, exactly what kind of sounds we have, liquids and semi-vowels, of course, and vowels. Approximants and vowels, approximants and vowels, you must remember them. Okay, now I want to tell you one thing. Let's talk about the previous slide. I'm sure most of you were a little bit confused, because when I said okay, are you getting my point, maybe it is possible some of you are saying no, absolutely not. Yes, you are right, because we did not have the sounds in front of you or the symbols in front of us. It's very important to understand. Now whatever we discussed in the previous slide, now it is over here in this slide you can understand. And I want you to focus what I said. What happens when we are having, for example, if the degree of stricture is complete closure, what happens? And if there is a close approximant, what happens? And if there is a open approximant, what happens? Now on the left side you can see, of course, on the screen, manner of stricture. Can you see that? Manner of stricture. Can you see that? Now three areas are identified here, but of course the fourth one, that is the additional aspect, leave it for the time being. Try to understand, number one, the complete closure, second, close approximation, the third, open approximation. Now this chart, in fact, this slide enables you, I'm sure, to understand that what is the degree of stricture in fact. So we have to understand first of all what is stricture. We try to understand that this is some kind of constriction, and then we try to understand what is constriction. We came to know, all right, it is primarily obstruction. When we talk about obstruction, all right, then we have to talk about the degree of obstruction. What is the degree of obstruction? We came to know that there are 3 degrees of stricture. Now first one is what? That is complete closure. This is what we know. What is complete closure? Absolutely blocked. And the second one, we try to understand close approximation, and the third one, open approximation. Now if in case there is a complete closure, what happens? What kind of sounds we have? Now you can see on the right side, of course, the arrows are directing to that area. Rapid speed of release number 1. Read it. I want you take 1 minute or 2. Please try to read first of all, so that when I come to you and when I produce this sound, you are in the comfortable zone. Okay? So comfort zone is there. First of all, we shall try to understand the complete closure. What is the manner of stricture? Let's try to understand the complete closure. If there is a complete closure during the production of speech sound, what happens to us? Rapid speed of release. And examples are p, t, k. Right? You can feel the puff of air. The puff of air. P, t, k. And then there is slow speed of release. Do you remember? Ch and j, ch and j. Then there is rapid overall artic rate, r, r. Then slow overall artic rate, h, t. If you, for example, say star, right? It is not that plosive, it. When you say t, it, t, all right? Then there is single closure, absolutely close, t, t. And when you have rapid repetition, r, r, r. So next category is the close approximation. In this kind of degree, we have got fricatives such as f, z, and the. F, family, z, zoo, the, this. And so far as the open approximation is concerned, we have got three different categories: resonants, sonorants, and approximants. Do you have any answer? What are these? Can somebody tell me? I want you to stop it. I want you to stop it, and I want you to write your answer. Whatever is the answer, that makes no difference at all. Okay? Now I want you to tell your answers, whatever the answers you wrote. It's okay. In front of you can see resonant, sonorant, and approximant. I want to read for you first of all. Resonant describes sound that is deep and rich. It also can mean deeply evocative. A resonant speech moves you by bringing to mind all that is good in the world. Resonant. For example, a resonant speech moves you by bringing to mind all that is good in the world. For example, family. When I talk about your family, or when you talk about your family, don't you think everything is very much good that comes to your mind? Then friends. When you think about your friends, especially the friends you miss, you spend time with them. Yes, exactly. It also brings something good to your mind, isn't it? And then laughter. When you're laughing, what makes you laugh? What does laughter mean? What does laughter stand for? Of course, that something good is coming to your mind. So that is what we call resonant. So that sound, it describes that sort of feeling very much in that the speech. When there is a resonant speech, remember, it moves you by bringing to the mind all that is good in the world. And I have given the three examples such as family, friends, laughter. Then we have to try to understand what is sonorant. Sonorant is a sound produced with the vocal cords, so position that spontaneous voicing is possible, such as a vowel or a glide or a liquid or a nasal consonant. That means that is something very much related to spontaneous voicing. Spontaneous voicing, what does that mean? Without any pressure, without any deliberate effort, remember, voicing, that means vibration occurs. Alright? Yes, exactly. So, of course, that these are the sounds which are very much connected with the vocal cords, because they are positioned in such a way you can have a spontaneous voicing. When you are, for example, producing vowels, what happens? Maybe diphthongs, right? Glides. A, I, O, ow. Or for instance, E, I, a, ah, oh, whatever you produce. Are you getting the point? And the third category, or the third word you came across during the understanding of previous slide, was the approximant. Remember, an approximant is a consonant produced by bringing one articulator, the tongue or lips, close to another without actually touching it. For instance, we have got two sounds, and the statement says that it's a consonant produced by bringing one articulator, that could be tongue or lips, close to another without actually touching it. And the sounds I'm presenting before you are R. You are not touching the tongue to the teeth ridge. R, R. Or for instance, when you are producing the sound W, you are rounding your lips, but you are not touching the lips in the as in the case of P or B or M. So this is what we call approximant sound or the approximant consonant. Okay? Now, after having talked about the degree of stricture, now we have to understand the nature of stricture. What is this? Right? When we say the nature of stricture, what is nature of stricture? Now, let me read this statement for you people first of all. Remember, by the nature of stricture, we mean the manner of articulation. Now, nature of stricture primarily means the manner of articulation, and we have had a complete discussion on manner of articulation. We try to understand manner of articulation with the help of certain diagrams and of course certain photographs. Manner of articulation. So somebody puts you a question, what is nature of stricture? So the answer is primarily we mean what? The manner of articulation. The manner of articulation is primarily considered as the nature of stricture. Now this structure of obstruction made by the organs may be total. Remember, obstruction, this is what we try to understand. Stricture means constriction, constriction means obstruction, or here obstruction made by the organs may be total. Remember, stricture may be total closure or intermittent or partial, or it is possible may merely constitute a narrowing sufficient to cause friction. Not necessarily, and you have to try to understand one thing, it is closely associated with the degrees of stricture. Not necessarily when we are saying obstruction, when for example I'm talking about I'm producing certain consonants or maybe vowel sounds, remember sometimes what happens, there is a complete closure, total closure, and it is closure of what? Certain speech organs. For instance, I talk about the plosives, we have to stop the airflow, and after what happened, there is a burst. Okay? Sometimes there is a there is an interval. Sometimes there is partial closure, I mean obstruction. Or sometimes there is a narrowing of what? Speech organ, sufficient to cause friction. Sometimes it is possible that the speech organs are close to one another to cause friction, meaning by to cause obstruction. So this is what we call nature of stricture. All right? I want to give you some sort of examples. For example, remember, when the stricture is that of a complete closure, the active and passive articulators make a firm contact with each other. What I'm saying? I'm giving you an example that when the stricture is that of a complete closure, the active and the passive articulators make a firm contact with each other. Now, what do you mean by firm contact with each other? That means they are not allowing the airflow to go out. Aggressive pulmonic. Do you remember? Yes, exactly. Because we are bound to throw the air outside. Since English is one of the Germanic languages, it belongs to that family, so we are bound to throw the airflow outside, and we have to let the airflow go outside either through the oral cavity or the nasal cavity. So what happens when we say that there is a complete closure? That means that the active and the passive articulators make a firm contact with each other and prevent the passage of air between them. So that's very important to understand. For you to understand is, let's talk about the production of p sound. Pin. We are producing the sound p. The word is pin, or the other sound is b. The word is bin. Now what happens when we produce p or b? The lips make a total closure. P, pin. b, bin, b, bat, b, bowl. You can feel and you can experience that the lips are making total closure. They are not allowing the air, first of all, and then what happened? There is a puff of air. As I think I told you and I shared with you that you can just put a piece of page in front of your lips and you produce these sounds, you will find there is a burst of air, isn't it? With the pressure, the airflow is released. So this is what we call the complete closure. For instance, I mean, this is what I'm giving you an example. Okay? Now we have to understand the next type. For example, the stricture may be such that air passes between the active and the passive articulators intermittently. Such a stricture is called intermittent closure and involves the vibration of the active articulator against the passive. Are you getting my point? Now this type of stricture, which is generally known as, popularly known as intermittently or intermittent closure, what does that mean? Articulators, now what happens? Air passes between the active and passive articulators intermittently, right? There is some sort of interval. So such a stricture is called intermittent closure because what's happening? It involves the vibration of the active articulator against the passive. And for this to understand, we need an example, the example of English sound R. Now what's happening when we are producing the R sound? The tip of the tongue, which is absolutely active articulator, makes one tap against the teeth ridge, R, R, R. So against the teeth ridge, it is not written, or I'm not saying that touching absolutely the teeth ridge, no. It gives simply one tap against the teeth ridge. That is a passive articulator. And this is what I'm saying, that the stricture may be such that air passes between the active and the passive articulators intermittently. Such a stricture is called intermittent closure and involves the vibration of the active articulator against the passive. This is what I'm trying to establish now. For example, in the case of R sound in English language, what happens? Say R. When you say R, the tip of the tongue, of course, that is active articulator. Tongue is an active articulator. Rather, most importantly, it is on the top. We have got lower lip and the tongue. But tongue, as an active articulator, makes one tap against the teeth ridge. And teeth ridge is passive articulator. You know that. Once again, I'm telling you, it is the active articulator that approaches the passive articulators. They relax. They feel relaxed. They are sitting. Are you getting my point? This is called intermittent closure. All right? Now let's try to understand the partial stricture. What is partial stricture? The air passes between the active and passive articulators continuously. The air passes between the active and passive articulators continuously, but with some difficulty. That's very important to understand. Do you remember I talked about the dark L and the clear L? Yes, exactly. You can recall I talked about dark L and the clear L. We are talking about partial stricture. The partial stricture, what happens over here? The air passes between the active and passive articulators continuously, but with some difficulty. Now, for instance, let's try to understand. The sounds thus produced are clear L and dark L. I am saying clear L and dark L. I repeat, the sounds thus produced are clear L and dark L. For example, in light, and hill, the clear and the dark L respectively. In light, You never say late, late. But when you say hill, there is dark L. But when you say late, it is clear L. Late and hill. Are you getting my point? So you have to feel what I'm saying. The air passes between the active and passive articulators continuously, but with some difficulty. Late. Sides of the tongue, they are allowing the air to go outside the mouth, all right? Or hill. The tongue is there towards the alveolar ridge, but the sides of the tongue, they are allowing the airflow to go out. Okay? And lastly, the stricture may be such that the air, while passing between the active and passive articulators, produces audible friction. The last kind of stricture is what we have to understand is what is the kind that the air, while passing between the active and passive articulators, produces audible friction. Audible friction. Audible friction. Now, first of all, I want to produce these sounds. For example, f, v, th, the, s, z, j, and sometimes h. In English, all examples of this kind of stricture. There is audible friction, but why it happens, that's important to understand, because while the air, while passing between the active and passive articulators, produces some sort of audible friction. In the case of English language, we have got f, v, th, the, s, z, j, and sometimes h, because we know that this is a glottal sound, and sometimes it is possible that, all right, there could be friction, but there could not be friction. But moreover, it is in the bold line you can understand that, or the air may pass without friction. There is audible friction, so far as f, v, th, the, s, z, j, and of course sometimes h, they are concerned. Why? Because the air, while passing between the active and passive articulators, produces audible friction, so far as these sounds are concerned. But it is very much possible that the air may pass without friction. If the air passes without friction, so we are left with these sounds, for example. The first one is w, wet, wet. The next sound is y, y, yes, you, not j, it is y. And then r, butter. If you, for example, produce R sound, butter. So in that case, remember, air is passing, but there is no friction. Without any friction, we allow the air stream or the airflow to go out of our mouth. W, y, and r. Okay? Now this is the time to think about stricture types. Alright? Let's read the statement first. Each stricture type generates a sound of specific type and quality. Type and quality. Each stricture type generates a sound of specific type and quality. It is the stricture type or manner of articulation that finally shapes the airstream into specific sounds by placing the articulating organs in different positions. Now what happens in fact? We are in fact talking about the place of articulation and manner of articulation. Alright? Because we understand each stricture type generates a sound of specific type and quality. And when you say this, what happens? It is the stricture type or manner of articulation that finally shapes the airstream into specific sound by placing the articulating organs in different positions. The airstream, in fact, desires the articulating organs what their position should be. This is what the inside us happens. And yes, of course, unconsciously. When we know some sort of language, for instance, we know English language, what happens? The airstreams, in fact, that wants, that desires that the articulating organs should be positioned this way or that way in accordance with the need of the speech organ. And then the second thing is, the vocal tract is considered a four-dimensional tube. Now, you must understand something new. Four-dimensional tube. This is first time we are saying that the vocal tract is considered a four-dimensional tube that runs from the larynx to the mouth to the lips and through the nasal cavity to the nostrils. So 4 dimensions running from larynx through the mouth to the lips and through the nasal cavity and then nostrils. Mouth, lips, nasal cavity and nostrils. Are you getting my point now? This is something new about the vocal tract. We have not used this kind of word or this kind of words for vocal tract. This time we are saying that primarily vocal tract is a four-dimensional tube that runs from the larynx. The origin is larynx, through the mouth to the lips and through the nasal cavity to the nostril. One side is mouth and lips. The other side is the nasal cavity and the nostrils. Are you getting my point? Lips ending spot of oral cavity, nostrils ending spot of nasal cavity. So this is the tract that contains the vocal organs, and the 4 dimensions indicate space in relation to the organs and time. That's very important. So larynx, then 4 areas, for example, what happens? Mouth to the lips and nasal cavity to the nostrils. So we understand this time that vocal tract is primarily a 4-dimensional tube. Okay? The 4 dimensions, this is what I talked when I was talking about the vocal tract. The first one is the vertical dimension, represented by the degree of closeness between the articulatory organs. In most articulations, the active articulator approaches the passive one in a vertical direction. That means the active articulator in this kind of dimension, that is vertical dimension, as the name tells us, it approaches the passive. The active articulator approaches the passive articulator in a vertical direction. That's very important to understand. All right. The next dimension is transverse dimension. The side-to-side dimension that specifies the location of the oral path, which can be. Now, under transverse dimension, there could be 2. One is the median, and that is through the center of the mouth, as in th and the. When I say median, that means center of the mouth, as in th and the. Alright, you can produce the sounds th and the. And the second is the lateral. You can understand when we are producing l sound, the both sides of the mouth are allowing the airflow to go outside through mouth, definitely. And the end spot of mouth is lips or lips. Alright, so transverse dimension, what happens? There are 2 under this, median and lateral. Sometimes the middle or the center of the mouth, as in the case of th and the second is the lateral in the case of l sound. Okay. Well, the next dimension is longitudinal dimension. My dear students, this represents the location of the articulation at any of the points in the vocal tract from the lips back and down to the larynx. For example, the difference between p, t, k and g is longitudinal. All of the same manner of articulation but different locations of articulation. Different locations of articulation. The place of articulation is different, otherwise the same manner of articulation. What happens? The difference between or among p, t, k, p, t, k, g, p, t, k, g. It's longitudinal. Why? Because they have the same manner of articulation, but different locations of articulation. That means the place of articulation is different, manner of articulation is the same. And the final dimension is the time dimension. Remember, this dimension specifies whether an articulator is one of a momentary gesture, a maintainable posture. Whether momentary, just for the time, and that is maintainable posture. That is time dimension. When we talk about different dimensions regarding what? Vocal tract, exactly. It's a 4-dimension tube. Okay? Well, before we close this session, I think it's very important that we must have a look again on the speech organs, and I want you to focus on this slide. You can again recall what happens inside us, and of course each and every speech organ has been mentioned over here. Starting from the bottom, you can see the windpipe, and then we have got esophagus, we've got vocal cords, epiglottis, pharynx, uvula. Okay, since we were talking about the 4-dimension tube, you can see the vocal tract, and of course it is very much dependent on all these speech organs. We've got alveolar ridge, we've got the soft palate, hard palate, we've got nasal cavity, we've got of course the nostril. They are in front of you. And then for example, we have got lips, of course labial, bilabial sounds, labiodental, you can bilabial sounds, it is very much in the red, you can see that. And then for example, outside you can see the Adam's apple, inside we have got voice box. So all the speech organs are very much in front of you. Again, I want you to focus, I want you to time and again refer to such kind of slides, such kind of diagrams, so that you may be able to remember each and every speech organ. For example, I talked about the vocal tract here, and then we were talking about, for example, the dimensions. Since we are very much concerned with the stricture, we try to understand the degree of stricture and the nature of stricture, and it's very important whatever you have done. When we understand the theory of stricture, what is stricture, what are the degrees of stricture, and what are the dimensions, so you must focus all these things and correlate what we have done or what we have discussed. All right. Well, before we end this session, I think it's appropriate to talk about the self-assessment component, which I always tell you is very important, because whatever we discuss with the aim, because each session starts with of course the first slide, and it tells the second slide tells us something about the number of sessions in the week, but the third slide is always based on what topics we are going to discuss in this session. And I try my level best to have some sort of drill during the session, some sort of activities. And at the end of the session, I try to ask the same things which we've done throughout the session. And again, in front of you, I am interested to know from your side that what do you know about stricture, its nature and dimension. You know, for example, what is stricture, constriction, what is the meaning of constriction, obstruction, and then of course nature, what kind of stricture we have. Maybe we have got, for example, a close, complete closure, or maybe close approximant or the open approximant. Then we've got, these are the degrees. Of course, we talked about the dimension at the same time. So I want you to write comprehensively. I want you to explain each and everything, and please do not forget to put it in the folder which I requested you to make, not only for this particular course, but each and every course you are having nowadays in this semester. So that's and from my side, one more thing. Goodbye and good luck. Stay blessed.